The van sat in the far corner of the lot, rust bleeding through primer gray along the wheel wells, a crack spider webbing across the windshield. It looked like something a tow company might tag for removal. Victoria Ashford stepped out of her Audi, heels clicking on fresh asphalt, and stopped when she saw it. She turned to her assistant, a young man named Derek, who carried a leather portfolio and wore a tie that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. "Whose van is that?" Derek checked his phone. "The auto shop? Restored Classics? The owner parks it there sometimes." Victoria looked at the dent in the sliding door, at the faded decal peeling away from the rear window. "Tell him to move it. This is a premium commercial property, not a junkyard." She did not know that the man who owned that van also owned the land beneath her feet, the entire 2-acre lot where her firm had just signed a 10-year lease, the access road, and the utility easement that powered every light in her gleaming new office building. She did not know that the lease she had just negotiated at what she believed was a remarkable rate was not with the landlord at all, but with a management company that had no authority to bind the actual owner to anything. She had never asked who held the deed. Every detail here matters. The morning it started, Thomas Brennan was under the hood of a 1967 Mustang, hands black with grease, working a seized bolt free from the engine block. The shop smelled like motor oil and the slow burn of welding flux from the bay, where his lead mechanic, a man named Ray, was patching a frame rail on a Chevelle. The Mustang belonged to a doctor from the next county over, a man who had bought it as a retirement project and then discovered he had no idea what a project meant. Thomas had been working on it for 6 weeks, methodical and unhurried, the kind of restoration that required taking the engine down to bare components and rebuilding it piece by piece. He did not rush the work. The shop was small, a single-story cinder-block building with 3 bays and an office that doubled as a waiting room. Thomas had opened it 4 years ago, after Claire died, after he walked away from a career that had taken him to workshops in Germany and Italy, after he decided that his daughter Emma needed a father who came home at 5:30 and did not spend 200 days a year on airplanes. Emma was 7 now. She had her mother's dark hair and a stuffed rabbit named Clover that went everywhere, a rabbit Claire had sewn by hand the week before the accident. The shop was enough. It paid the bills. It let him pick Emma up from school. Ray looked up from his work, pulling his welding mask back. "You see the new tenant moved in across the lot?" Thomas straightened, wiping his hands on a rag that would never come clean. "I saw the sign go up. Ashford Consulting Group. Looks expensive." Thomas nodded. The building had been empty for 8 months. The management company that handled the property had sent him a courtesy notice 2 weeks ago. The kind of form letter that said, "New tenant. No changes to your access." He had filed it and forgotten it. The lot was his. He went back to the Mustang. Victoria Ashford walked into the shop 3 days later. She did not knock. The door was open, the way it always was when Thomas was working, and she stepped inside, wearing a charcoal suit and an expression that suggested she was already annoyed. Thomas was at the workbench, cleaning carburetor jets with a wire brush and a pan of solvent. He heard her heels on the concrete and turned. "Can I help you?" She looked around the shop, at the oil-stained floor, at the parts laid out on a tarp, at the calendar on the wall that was 2 months out of date. "I'm Victoria Ashford. I run the consulting firm across the lot. I wanted to discuss the parking situation." Thomas set down the brush. "What situation?" "Your van? The one parked in the corner. It's an eyesore, and frankly, it reflects poorly on the entire property. I'd appreciate it if you move it, or better yet, get rid of it." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. The van was a 1985 Volkswagen Vanagon, a vehicle he had bought for $600 and kept running through patients and scavenged parts. It was ugly. It was also the vehicle he used to haul tools and pick up parts. "It's parked in my spot," he said quietly. "Your spot is designated for your business, not for storing junk. If you need to keep a parts vehicle, do it somewhere else." She handed him a business card, crisp and heavy stock. "I'm sure we can work something out. Professional courtesy." She left before he could respond. Ray had been listening from the next bay. He walked over, shaking his head. "You going to tell her?" Thomas slipped the card into his shirt pocket. "Not yet." That night, after he put Emma to bed, Thomas sat at the kitchen table with a folder he had not opened in years. It were the original deed to the property, the trust documents Claire had helped him set up, and the lease agreements his attorney had drafted when the first tenant moved into the building Victoria now occupied. He read through them slowly, checking dates and clauses. The land had been in his family for 60 years, a small commercial parcel his grandfather bought when the area was still farmland. Thomas had inherited it when his father passed, and he had kept it simple. Leased the building, maintained the lot, let a management company handle the month-to-month details. The current lease was supposed to have been renegotiated last year, but the management company had let it slide. He found the letter the company had sent him 2 months ago, the one announcing the new tenant. It was addressed to him as the property owner. It confirmed the lease term, and it was signed by someone at the management company who, according to the trust documents, had no authority to execute a lease longer than 6 months without Thomas's written approval. Victoria's 10-year lease was not valid. He read the clause twice. Then he closed the folder and sat in the stillness of the house. The only sound, the hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a dog 2 streets over. He thought about Claire, about the way she used to sit across from him at this same table and walk him through decisions with the kind of clarity that made complicated things simple. She would have told him to handle it quietly. She would have told him to let the work speak. He decided to rebuild the van. Day 1, Shabbat. He pulled the Vanagon into the first bay and started the teardown. The engine was tired, burning oil. The transmission slipping between second and third. He had been nursing it along for 2 years, but if he was going to make a point, he was going to make it correctly. Ray raised an eyebrow when he saw the van on the lift. "You serious?" Thomas sighed. Emma came by after school, her backpack dragging on the floor, Clover tucked under one arm. She climbed onto the stool by the workbench and watched him pull the engine. "Why are you fixing the ugly van?" "Because it's worth fixing," Thomas said. She thought about that. Mom used to say that about people. He smiled. She was right. Day 2, he disassembled the engine on the bench, laying out every bolt and gasket in the order they came off. The block was worn, but not cracked. The cylinders had scoring, but nothing that could not be honed out. He had rebuilt engines like this 100 times, in shops that charged $15,000 for the labor, for clients who flew in from other continents. This one would cost him parts and time. Ray helped him pull the transmission, and they found the clutch disc was nearly gone. Friction material worn down to the rivets. "You could have grenaded this thing," Ray said. Thomas nodded. He had known it was close. Day 3, he started the machine work. The cylinders went to a shop he trusted, a man named Vic, who had been doing precision boring since before Thomas was born. The crankshaft went out for balancing. Thomas cleaned and inspected every component, checking tolerances with calipers, replacing anything that did not meet specification. It was the kind of work that required silence and attention. Emma sat on the stool again that afternoon, drawing on the back of an old invoice. "Is the lady going to be mad?" Thomas looked up. "What lady?" "The one who said the van is junk." He set down the micrometer. "Maybe. Are you going to tell her she's wrong?" "No, I'm going to show her." Day 4, the parts came back. He began the reassembly, torquing head bolts in sequence, setting valve lash by feel and feeler gauge, the way he had been taught 20 years ago by a master mechanic in Stuttgart who did not believe in shortcuts. Ray watched him work. "You know she's not going to care, right? People like that don't see the work. They see the wrapper." Thomas threaded another bolt. "Then she'll learn something." Day 8, the engine went back in. Day 12, he rebuilt the suspension, replacing every bushing and shock, upgrading the sway bars, installing components that had not been available when the van was new. The transmission was next, a full rebuild with upgraded synchros, and a clutch kit that cost more than he had paid for the van. It was excessive. It was also correct. Emma came by on day 15 with a drawing she had made at school, a picture of the van with flames coming out of the back and a banner across the top that said, "Daddy's Cool Van." He taped it to the side of the toolbox. Ray laughed. "She gets it." Thomas nodded. Day 19. He started the exterior. The rust was surface level, the kind of damage that looked worse than it was. He sanded it down to bare metal, treated it, primed it, and then called in a favor from a painter he knew, a man who owed him for a frame-off restoration on a Porsche 911. The painter came by on day 21 and sprayed the van in anthracite gray, a factory Volkswagen code from 1985, the original shade. It was not flashy. It was correct. The windshield was replaced. The dent in the sliding door was pulled and filled. The decal was removed. By day 23, the van looked like it had rolled off a showroom floor 3 decades ago. But Thomas was not finished. He pulled the interior, replaced the seats with restored originals he sourced from a Vanagon specialist in Oregon, installed new carpet, refinished the wood trim. He rebuilt the dashboard, replacing every cracked piece of plastic, every faded switch. On day 26, he fired the engine for the first time. It started on the second turn of the key, settled into an idle that was smooth and quiet, the kind of mechanical whisper that only came from components machined to tolerance and assembled with care. Ray stood next to him, listening. That's the $30,000 restoration. Thomas nodded. About that. The Vanagon went to the car show on a Saturday. It was a regional event, the kind of gathering that drew collectors and enthusiasts from 4 states, held in a convention center parking lot with judges who knew the difference between correct and close. Thomas registered the van in the restoration class, the category for vehicles returned to original or better than original condition. He parked it in the assigned spot and walked away. Emma stayed with him, holding Clover, wearing a dress Claire had bought her the summer before she died. They walked through the rows of cars, past Corvettes and Camaros, and a Ford GT40 replica that drew a crowd. Emma stopped in front of a 1932 Ford coupe, painted candy apple red. Is ours better? He smiled. Different kind of better. The judging happened at noon. Thomas did not watch. He bought Emma a lemonade, and they sat on a bench in the shade, and she told him about a book she was reading, something about a girl and a horse and a farm. At 2:00, the announcement started. 3rd place in the restoration class went to a Chevrolet Bel Air. 2nd place went to a Triumph TR6. 1st place went to the 1985 Volkswagen Vanagon. Registry number verified. Restoration documented score, 97 out of 100. The judge, a man named Coleman, who had been evaluating restorations for 30 years, walked over to Thomas afterward. I need to know who did the engine work. Thomas shook his hand. I did. Coleman looked at him for a long moment. You do this professionally? I used to. You should again. He handed Thomas a ribbon and a certificate, embossed with the show's seal, signed by 3 judges. That's one of the cleanest rebuilds I've seen this year. Everything correct, everything documented. If you ever want to bring something to Pebble Beach, call me. He left his card. Victoria Ashford saw the van on Monday morning. It was parked in the same spot, but it was not the same vehicle. The rust was gone. The dent was gone. The paint was flawless. She stopped walking and stared at it, and for a moment she did not understand what she was looking at. Then she saw the ribbon in the window, the certificate on the dash. She walked across the lot to the shop. Thomas was at the workbench, cleaning a set of brake calipers. She stood in the doorway, and when he looked up, her voice had changed. It was quieter, uncertain. I saw the van. Thomas set down the caliper. Did you? It won first place. It did. She stepped inside, and he saw her looking around the shop differently now. At the tools hung in order on the wall. At the engine stand in the corner. At the framed photographs of cars he had restored. I didn't realize you were a specialist. Thomas wiped his hands. I'm a mechanic. She shook her head. No, you're not. She pulled out her phone, typed something, and then turned the screen toward him. It was an article from a trade journal, 5 years old. A profile of the top 10 restoration specialists in the country. His name was fourth on the list. You walked away from this. It was not a question. I did. Why? He thought about Claire, about Emma, about the choice that had not felt like a choice at all. Because I had something more important to build. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I owe you an apology. Thomas waited. I made assumptions about you, about the van. I was wrong. He nodded. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. I also need to talk to you about the lease. Thomas crossed his arms. What about it? I did some research over the weekend. After I saw the van, I wanted to understand who I was dealing with, and I found the deed records. She opened the folder and showed him a printout, a county document that listed him as the owner of the property. You own this lot. I do. Her face changed. The confidence drained out of it, replaced by something close to embarrassment. The management company told me the lease was finalized. They said everything was handled. It wasn't. The lease required my approval for any term over 6 months. No one asked me. She closed the folder. Her hands were shaking slightly. What do you want? Thomas looked at her. He thought about telling her to leave. He thought about canceling the lease, about finding a tenant who would not walk into his shop and call his work junk. But he thought about Emma, about the lesson that mattered more than the satisfaction. I want the lease to be correct. I want it rewritten with the terms I agreed to. And I want respect. Victoria nodded. Done. She hesitated. And if you ever want to consult, if you ever want to do restoration work again, I know people who would pay what you're worth. Thomas shook his head. I'm good where I am. She left and Ray came out of the back office grinning. You just turned down a fortune. Thomas picked up the caliper again. I didn't need a fortune. That night, he parked the van in the driveway at home. Emma came out and ran her hand along the fender, the paint smooth and cool under her palm. It's really pretty now. Thomas crouched down next to her. It was always good. It just needed someone to see it. She hugged Clover and looked up at him. Like people. He smiled. Like people. The lease arrived by courier on Thursday, a bound document with the correct terms, the correct signatures, and a cover letter from Victoria's attorney that used the word oversight 3 times. Thomas read it in the office while Ray balanced the books and Emma did homework at the desk they had cleared for her, her pencil moving across a worksheet about fractions. The lease was month to month for the building, with a clause that gave Thomas final approval on any tenant and a provision that required the management company to consult him before executing any agreement longer than 90 days. It was what he had asked for. He signed it and filed it in the folder with the deed. Victoria did not come back to the shop, but she sent us an email 2 days later. It was brief, professional. She thanked him for his patience and said that if he ever reconsidered the consulting work, her firm had clients in the automotive sector who would value his expertise. She did not mention the van again. Thomas deleted the email and went back to the Mustang. The doctor had called that morning to ask when it would be ready, and Thomas had told him another 2 weeks. The truth was it could have been ready in 3 days, but he did not believe in rushing the final assembly. He took his time. Or Ray looked up from the Chevelle one afternoon. "You think she learned anything?" Thomas was adjusting the timing on the Mustang, listening to the engine idle, making changes in fractions of a degree. "Maybe." "You're generous." Thomas smiled. "I'm realistic." He thought about the way Victoria's voice had changed when she came back, the way the certainty had drained out of it and left something quieter behind. People learned when the lesson cost them something. She had believed the van was junk, and she had been wrong in a way that was public and measurable. That was the kind of correction that stuck. Emma climbed onto the stool and watched him work. Clover sat in her lap, one ear bent from years of being carried everywhere. "Did the mean lady say sorry?" Thomas nodded. "She did." "Is she still mean?" He thought about that. "I don't think she was mean. I think she didn't know how to look." Emma considered this, her face serious in the way children get when they are working through something that matters. Mom used to say that people don't see things right when they're in a hurry. Thomas set down the timing light. Claire had said that. She had said it about people who judge too fast, about decisions made without enough information, about the way the world looked different when you slowed down enough to actually see it. She was right. The Mustang went home the following Tuesday. The doctor arrived with a trailer, and when Thomas fired the engine and let him hear it, the man stood there with his hands in his pockets and did not say anything for a long moment. Then he shook Thomas's hand and said, "This is better than I imagined." Thomas helped him load the car, secured it to the trailer, and watched him drive away. Ray came out of the shop and stood next to him. 3 months of work? It was. You could have charged him twice what you did. Thomas shrugged. He paid what it was worth. The bay was empty now, the lift clear, the floor swept. He had another job starting Monday, a Triumph Spitfire that needed a frame-off restoration, the kind of work that would take most of the summer. He was looking forward to it. That weekend, he took Emma to the park. It was the same park Claire used to take her to, a place with old swings and a slide that had been there since Thomas was a kid. Emma ran ahead with Clover, her shoes kicking up dust, and Thomas sat on a bench and watched her play. The van was parked at the curb, still flawless, still correct. A man walking past stopped and looked at it, then walked over to Thomas. "That's a beautiful Vanagon." Thomas nodded. "Thank you." "Original?" "Restored." The man whistled. He said, "You do the work?" I did. The man pulled out his phone and took a picture. "I've been looking for someone who can do a proper restoration on an old Syncro. You have a card?" Thomas gave him one. The man thanked him and walked away, and Thomas sat there in the stillness of the afternoon, the sun warm on his shoulders, Emma's laughter carrying across the playground. He thought about the way the work had unfolded, the way the van had gone from junk to something people stopped to photograph. The object had not changed. The van had always been worth saving. It had just needed someone to see it clearly, to look past the rust and the dents and the surface damage, to understand that value was not about appearance. It was about what something could become in the hands of someone who knew how to build. Emma ran back to him, breathless, holding Clover by one paw. "Can we get ice cream?" He stood. "We can." The house was quiet when they got home. Emma fell asleep on the couch with Clover tucked under her chin, and Thomas carried her to bed, pulling the blanket up to her shoulders the way Claire used to. He walked back through the kitchen and stopped at the window, looking out at the driveway where the van sat under the streetlight. The paint gleamed. The lines were clean. It looked like what it was, a thing made right through patience and skill, through the kind of attention that most people did not have time for anymore. He had learned that attention from masters who believed that craft was not about speed or shortcuts. He had walked away from that world because Emma needed him more than the work did. But the principles had stayed. They had moved with him into this smaller shop, into these quieter projects, into a life that did not require him to prove anything to anyone except himself. Victoria had seen the van and assumed it was junk because she had been trained to see value in surfaces, in the kind of shine that came from money rather than labor. She had learned otherwise. Maybe she would carry that forward. Maybe she would look at the next thing differently, or maybe she would forget. It did not matter. The work had been done correctly. The van was proof. That was enough. Thomas turned off the kitchen light and walked down the hall. Emma's door was open, and he could hear her breathing, soft and steady. The house settled around him. Outside the streetlight hummed. The van sat still. Everything was exactly as it should be.